Namaste and welcome to another edition of the Bharatvaarta Weekly. It's been a rather eventful week and we have a lot to discuss. Interestingly, the government picked up a stake in Vodafone Idea. Then, in some very interesting slash weird news, there was this whole Chinese spy balloon controversy in the US. And then our neighbors, Pakistan, has been hit with a lot more crises. All of this and more on this edition of the Bharatvaarta Weekly, where we cover the news and events that matter to you. Well, in a huge relief to Vodafone Idea, the government on Friday decided to convert the company's accrued interest worth 16,133 crores into equity. We had sought a firm commitment that the Aditya Birla Group would run the company and bring in necessary investments. We want India to be a three-player market plus BSNL and ensure healthy competition for consumers, said the Communication Minister, Mr. Ashwini Vaishnav, in a statement. Upon the conversion, the government would become the single largest shareholder in the company with around 33% stake, while the promoters' holding would come down from 74.99 to 50%. Abhishek, you just spoke about divestments. Here's a case of the government owning a telecom company now.
Yeah, so it's like we have now two public sector telecom companies, but yeah, I mean, this one is like a bit of a unique transaction, right? That Vodafone, which has been struggling, had this outstanding due, right, for interest, and which has basically got converted into equity. So there is no money that is sort of exchanging hands here. This is basically conversion of the net present value of the interest related to the deferment of spectrum auction installments and AGR dues. And that AGR due case is obviously a very long standing one, and it has gone up to the Supreme Court, I believe, right? So, yeah, I mean, in general, I do think that it's sort of good idea that there should be more than two companies fighting it out, but I don't know how long this will be sustainable, right? Like BSNL continues to make, I think, massive losses. Vodafone is kind of struggling. And basically, if you're not an efficient company in this very competitive space, when you have firms like Jio and Bharti as your competition, it does become difficult, right? And I don't think Vodafone Idea was ever able to sort of compete with Bharti and Reliance, right? Like, I think the perception Vodafone always had was like they're like a premium sort of service, but they are pretty expensive, relatively speaking, right? And with the sort of investments that someone like Geo was able to do, right? And also, I mean, it all came with pretty rapid improvements in quality from everyone, right? It's not like Vodafone is now providing something which is unique, right? While not also not having the sort of scale and presence that the other two have. So it's like a bit of a struggle for Vodafone right now. But yeah, an interesting transaction.
And it's a heck of a market as well, right? I mean, we have the cheapest data rates in the world. It's such a like a real dogfight in this market. So yeah, interesting how this will pan out. Well, in more interesting and kind of weird news, a balloon was spotted about 60,000 feet above the central continent in the US on Friday, and it was moving east. Pentagon Press Secretary Brigadier General Pat Ryder said the balloon has the ability to maneuver, but he did not provide any specifics. He also flatly denied the Chinese government's claim that the balloon serves a civilian research purpose, saying that the US knows it is a surveillance balloon. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken postponed his trip to China this weekend, saying the suspected surveillance balloon was, to quote, detrimental to discussions that the officials plan to have during his visit. Nirav, I don't know what to make of this. What can you tell us about this?
So this is basically this balloon. Obviously, like China is saying it's for like whatever civilian research. Maybe this is for gathering intelligence, gathering some stuff. This at this altitude is closer than what like satellites can look at, right? So possibly there's some angle there, but broadly, I think we are going into like a multipolar world, or you're seeing like what US and USSR had kind of Cold War, it's spying against each other, etc. Now it's between China and the US, right? So that is there. There is some speculation that some sort of a balloon might have been used over Port Blair as well earlier, and on the Andaman Islands. There is some second balloon which is flying over Latin America as well right now, right? So the US chose not to shoot it down, but that they are gathering intelligence on the intelligence gathering balloon, what it is. And the Secretary of State Anthony Blinken has cancelled his visit to China, right? So now I think we are seeing these two are actually moving further and further away. And here you are with this kind of distrust. US whole supply chain, and like China's biggest customer is the US, actually EU put together, but like one single country is US. And this probably will not last. So you're going to see slow decoupling at the margin every year, probably. Right now, the trade has just increased during COVID, but you will see some sort of moving out. And as I've been saying all along for like a while, over a year, all of this is an opportunity for India. That India was earlier non aligned and then it had no friends. Now maybe India is non aligned but has been like slightly friendly with Russia, been neutral against them in the war, but like depending on arms with them and like buying Russian oil and exporting diesel to Europe and the US. India has been friends with the US and India has been friends with Korea. So you are seeing Fox. So Korea, Samsung making more phones. So they want to move away from China. Foxconn, the Taiwanese companies assembling iPhones, right? Foxconn with Vedanta is trying to set up a semiconductor plant, right? This is telling you more about the world. So I don't know what is the legality of it. What is the legality of a balloon flying at 60,000 feet over ground, right? Commercial aircraft do fly 30 to 40,000 feet over ground. So I do not know about that. But this is like step by step from being like closely coupled and almost thinking of each other as like depending on each other to a great degree. China, its biggest customer, US and US's biggest supplier of all goods is China, right? Where everybody thought, okay, let's focus on efficiency, let's focus on getting the cost to the minimum, right? That is changing, and this is probably not the last time we see some sort of things, right? This will continue to escalate, and maybe over a decade we'll see a lot less trade between the two. So yeah, that's all what it is.
It's funny, okay. I keep thinking about the former President Trump. I mean, at least I mean, the earliest I can recall, right? Anyone really pointing to the whole China problem, right?
He hit the nail on the head. Also, second thing, people are underestimating the Chinese intelligence service, MSS, is hardly spoken about anywhere. People talk about CIA, people talk about KGB, or like now what's called FSB, MI5, MI6. People talk about
Mossad.
we are Indians, so raw, but Mossad, Israel's Mossad, right? A lot of stuff is talked about that. Nobody rarely mentions the MSS. And obviously,
Or you
there are
have Indian movies talking about ISI.
ISI, exactly, exactly, right?
That
But
was a full
nobody,
toss, huh?
yeah, but nobody is talking about MSS at all, right? Like rarely. So I think they are also, I would say, pretty advanced, pretty smart, run by smart people, and you will see some sort of all these kind of intelligence gathering things on both sides. So I think it is what it is.
Well, in more geopolitical news, last week Pakistan was hit by a suicide bomber who detonated the bomb in a mosque in Peshawar, leading to the death of more than 50 people. And also, I mean, another couple of unfortunate events for Pakistan. The IMF's bailout has been delayed as it doesn't see a change in the country's policies. And Iran has also given the country an ultimatum to either finish their part of the pipeline or pay $20 billion in penalty for not holding up their part of the deal. Abhishek, what do you see happening? I mean, the country seems to be imploding at this point of time. And how do you think it will impact India?
Yeah, it's obviously been a sort of turbulent time in Pakistan for the last few months and maybe over a year. So there was this tweet the other day that I saw from our previous CEA, Chief Economic Advisor, on how the valuation of the Pakistan rupee plummeted post our demonetization. Like it's a very fascinating coincidence. He's not employing any causation or anything, but it's a very, very striking sort of graph, right? That I mean, we can always have a lot of conspiracy theories about what was happening with our currency and all that prior to that, but certainly a very interesting thing. But coming back to your question, Pakistan is facing like crisis on various fronts, right? Like they are struggling a big time in terms of their economy, especially with their forex reserves barely having even a month worth of imports available, right, at the present time. So they are looking for people to sort of bail them out in the short term. So IMF is obviously one candidate, and the other candidates are, countries like the UAE or Saudi Arabia or even China. Now, the IMF is struggling to sort of agree to bail them out, because what happens is IMF is always looking for reforms, right? And reforms commitment from the country before it sort of lends, right? And so, an example of an IMF reform would be that you cut off your subsidies for petrol or diesel and things like that, right? Or you stop subsidizing electricity. The government that is in power itself is trying to do those things, but it sort of lacks the legitimacy, right? Because it did not really come into power through an election. It is basically like the two biggest opposition parties to Imran Khan having come together. That is the Muslim League, Pakistan Muslim League, and the Pakistan People's Party. It's like essentially, to in an Indian context, it's like the BJP and Congress have formed together the government with the Aam Aadmi Party being thrown out, which is basically how I would say Imran Khan is the sort of equivalent of that, right there. And of course, there's been a severe deterioration in the civil military relations as well, right? They are sort of struggling in terms of the Afghanistan situation, where initially there was a very big optimism in Pakistan that with the Americans going out, it would mean that Pakistan's sphere of influence would actually increase substantially, right? But that has not really proved to be the case. I don't think Pakistan has any sort of leverage or control over the Afghan Taliban right now, right? And so they are struggling there. The suicide bombing actually happened in the border areas, right, in the Khyber Pakhtunwala province. And so they are facing challenges of on the security front there. There's sort of always an ongoing insurgency in those areas or in Balochistan, right? So, yeah, I think they are facing a very wide variety of crisis, whether it is from governance or whether it is their economy. Coming to your second part of how it impacts India, I think India just needs to be vigilant and sort of vigilant in the security space, because obviously a sort of small adventure by Pakistan is always possible in Kashmir, right? Where it does something to distract right now when it is facing all sorts of challenges. They are also sort of speaking in folk tongues, right? Like you had this terrible rant by their foreign minister Bilawal Bhutto against, Narendra Modi and BJP, calling him Hitler and Nazi and what all, right? Which is like a very common sort of language now. But at the same time, it had their prime minister talking about, it's time for India and Pakistan to come together to make peace. And we are hearing talks about how the ball is in India's court. There is some sort of start of back channel negotiations again and again. And so I think, like, my view always has been that it's not a good idea to speak to Pakistan, because what happens is basically we know that there is no sort of resolution that is in sight or that is going to happen. But post the failures of the talks, it gives upper hand to, let's say, the ISI or the military to do some more adventures, right? Because then they say that, look, the politicians did not resolve it, so for us, it's time to do something. And so I always feel like with our lessons that we have learned in the past, right, whether it is especially Agra and then Kargil, right, it's a very good lesson that, let's not absolutely ramp up any expectations of any good thing to come out of talks, and it's best to avoid that right now. I think the status quo works out pretty well for India, and we should not give in to any sort of sentimentality to help them out right now.
Yeah, so Brown Pundits had a very nice podcast, I think, November of last year, where they discussed, the political situation in Pakistan. They had this ambassador Kamran Shafi and a Dr. Mohammad Taqi on the podcast. It was hosted by Dr. Omar. I highly recommend people check it out if you're interested in, what is happening there.
So, one thing I would say is the one thing Pakistanis are good apart from music is podcasts. Like they have some excellent podcasts on the net, right? Which, I mean, if you're interested in learning more about Pakistan, you can check it out. I mean, some of the things you would learn is, how basically Pakistan did not really invest in any sort of productive capabilities over the last few decades, right? They have become a pure rentier sort of rent seeking economy, right? Of real estate and those kind of things with, army bigwigs owning swaths of land and getting rich out of it, right? There's no real productive industry or capacity being built, unlike, let's say, a Bangladesh, right? With even its whatever capabilities it has produced some things of value, right, which it is able to export. Pakistan has simply been sort of, on one hand, you have its elites who are, totally focused on this whole narrative of going against India, right? And that's sort of their sole purpose of existence, to sort of stall India's rise. And internally, they've created a very sort of unbalanced and unproductive economy, and therefore they are in a bad place right now.
The elites that are left in Pakistan, that is, right? I mean, not
Yes,
the not
yes,
the ones who've already moved out to US, UK, or Canada, right?
yes, yeah.
Well, that brings us to the end of the Bharatvaarta Weekly. If you hung around until now and if you liked our content, don't forget to rate and review us. I know I keep saying this again, but it's really important for others to discover this content as well. So kindly help them. Share it with your family and friends if you think it's of value. We have a couple of interesting podcasts coming up next week. I'll be hosting Monica Jasuja, Mandar Kagade, and Sumita Kale on all of the innovation that's happened on the fintech side, and also we're going to talk about the regulator's perspective. Of course, Mandar specializes in that, right? So that will likely be an interesting discussion. So do check it out. We also have another episode in the Velina's Talk series. She's hosting Esfandiar Batman Gelij, the CEO of Bors and Bazaar Foundation, a think tank, right, talking about Iran's rising influence and power, its political background, the tensions with America because of their ties with Russia, and so on. So yeah, I mean, plenty of good stuff coming up next week. Do catch these episodes on all of your favorite platforms. But until then, from Neerav, Abhishek, and myself, thank you so much for joining us. We'll see you next week. Stay safe, take care, and Jai Hind.